Good morning. I'm with Al Kroontje of San Lorenzo Gold. San Lorenzo is in the midst of a drill program in northern Chile at the Salvadora Property, and the stock has had a tremendous start to 2026. So we're going to get into it with Al. Al, how are you today?
Hey, I'm doing well. Great to be with you, Robert.
Yeah, I bet you're doing well. Look at that. That chart is really phenomenal. It's just been an incredible move here in the last couple months, and it seems like every day I'm talking to more people who are new shareholders.
Cool. Great. Yeah, we're blessed with a special property there, Robert. I think you know that, and I think people are starting to understand that our hit rate there is pretty remarkable, and that property appears to be very well endowed with mineral resources.
Yeah, I mean the hit rate is definitely what gets the attention. At the Cerro Blanco, I don't know if a hole is missed. I don't think a hole is missed. I mean, you got gold pretty much at every drill hole so far. And then just a couple weeks ago, you announced the results for hole 0425 from Cerro Blanco, and I mean, the main interval is 132 meters of 1.09 grams per ton gold, but then obviously there's 5 intervals of gold, including at the very bottom of the hole, you got into over 10 meters of 1.33 grams per ton gold. So it's encouraging to see those wide intervals of gram plus gold. And then it's also encouraging to see the gold start to strengthen a little bit at depth. What do you make of that? The slight uptick there in the grade there at the bottom of the hole.
Well, a good way to explain it is that where we're drilling up there is 480 meters higher in elevation than the valley floor to the north, and at that valley floor you can see alteration right down to surface. So what we make of it is that it would appear that at least it goes to that depth, and there's no reason to believe it would stop there. And probably what we need to do is to drill a little steeper and deeper so that we really do test the system to a deeper depth. We really haven't, we've tested, I'm sorry, the breadth of the system, but not so much the depth of the system.
I see. Okay, so that'll be on the agenda next, I imagine, once you get all the assays back from, I believe that it'd be 3 additional holes from this phase of drilling.
Yeah, excuse me. We drilled 4 holes at Cerro Blanco, 1 on the east side of the litho-cap feature and 3 on the west side of the litho-cap feature. And I might remind that the IP was strongest as we start heading north. And so we have a line from 2018 that has not yet been drilled that has the strongest IP signature on it from that old program. So we're hopeful that as we drill, as we shoot or acquire, I guess you'd call it, more IP towards the north, that the system continues. And we have a lot of strike before we get to the valley floor. In fact, 1.7 kilometers of it. So the potential to host something very significant is very, very much there.
Yeah, so to be clear about this, the company has only drilled 4 holes so far at the Cerro Blanco, or at least you've only announced 4 holes. There's 3 more holes that have been drilled that are pending assays that I guess we'll get in the coming weeks and months. But still, that would still just make a total of 7 drill holes across a very substantial area. I mean, I'm not sure of the exact scale, but it's something on the order of like 1,500 by 500 or so meters, right? So there's a lot of room to test there. And as you said, it's open at depth, with the deepest hole so far just being drilled to 472 meters.
Yeah, of course, that's an angled hole, so its true vertical depth is more like 400 meters. So we haven't even quite gotten to the valley floor depth yet with our drilling. But it is our intention to go deeper. To summarize, in last year's program, we drilled 3 holes. They were about 500 meters away from each other. Then, subsequent to that, we ran a bit more IP right in the middle of the old lines that we had. We call that line C5. And a very interesting anomaly, chargeability anomaly related with resistivity anomaly appeared. And it's kind of on trend with that first hole we drilled in the first program. So we just finished that and announced those results. So yes, 3 holes in last year's program, and we drilled 4 holes in this year's program, with only 1 having been announced so far at Cerro Blanco. Now, I would remind you that there's 5 different targets on this property. So we moved to the Arco de Oro feature after drilling those holes at Cerro Blanco. And we're currently drilling at Arco de Oro as we speak. In fact, we're on our 12th hole of this program. You as well will remember our discussion. I think that I kind of committed to make sure that funding was in place for a 10-hole program. And clearly the funding is there now with the placement we just did here a little bit ago, but we're certainly going to meet that 10-hole commitment and more, and we intend to do a lot of drilling this year.
Yeah, so the company is well funded now, and obviously even just in the last month, a lot has changed probably in terms of the funding possibilities for the company. So I know a lot of investors I talk to in Vancouver are talking, oh, I want to see them 3 rigs, 4 rigs, 5 rigs, But it's obviously easy to say that in Vancouver. It's a whole nother thing to actually do it and get the drill crews there to site and have things run smoothly. So yeah, I mean, we can't talk about the holes that you don't have assays for. You can just say obviously maybe how deep they've been drilled and maybe where they've been drilled, but we need to see the assays for those holes. But it seems to be the body language is you're very encouraged, and the idea is to drill more and add more rigs. So what are the conversations that you're having in terms of increasing the number of rigs there at Salvadora?
The next requirement is to shoot some more IP, not shoot, acquire, I guess is the way you say that, because IP is working there, Robert, and so we don't want to explore with a drill bit. We want to explore using geophysical techniques and sampling and all of the above. Now, having said that, we have many locations that can already be drilled, but it's incumbent on us to to acquire more IP and target our drilling based on that. As a for instance, we drilled on line D8 at Arco de Oro, which is in our presentations. And it showed a number of great looking IP anomalies, but that's the extent of our IP. And we've got 2.5 kilometers to go to our northernmost boundary, but the IP there is still 3 kilometers away from where we drilled in what we call the core zone of Arco de Oro. So there's a lot of strike length that needs to have IP done on it and continue to drill out on that trend called Arco de Oro. And the same applies to Caballo Muerto, where we're really encouraged because we got a really great hole a while back, and surface sampling along the ridge shows the feature outcropping at surface. So there's a lot of work to be done at Caballo Muerto as well. And not to be forgotten about is what we call Tres Amigos, which is a more copper rich system in the middle of the property. So yeah, there's a lot to be done is what I'm trying to say here, but IP will be important in that process.
The interpretation that we had from the inception point, I guess when I first learned about San Lorenzo Gold, probably about 3 years ago, was that, you have a porphyry system with the epithermal gold vein swarms in certain parts of the property. Is that still just a broad brush interpretation? Have you gotten any more details in terms of this porphyry setting and maybe how many possible porphyry centers there are, and maybe the stage of erosion, or have they not been eroded at all?
Well, I think it's too preliminary to go into that, actually, Robert. We're drilling, and I will say that things look encouraging. It is a work in progress, of course. So as we move forward, we're learning more, excuse me, with every hole that we drill. And we're in a similar setting to the El Salvador mine, and this caldera collapse feature, and it's quite evident that there's been a lot of mineralization in the area. And so not only single events, but multi-episodal events. So the interpretation is proceeding as we drill. So I'd love to really be able to answer your question, but we really can't quite yet.
No, I totally understand. I was talking to another investor a couple of weeks ago, and the guy asked me an interesting question. He said, how did they acquire this project? And I said, well, I did an interview with Al, I don't know, 6 months ago, and he answered that question quite thoroughly. And he said, well, in Chile, these projects were looked at very closely in the 90s and throughout the 2000s by a bunch of big mining companies. So how did this slip through the cracks and get into a junior? And I said, well, hear Al's answer, and then also maybe appreciate that 1 gram per ton gold wasn't so great in 2002. And probably if some of these big companies saw a drill intercept of 100 meters of a gram, they might even yawn, quite frankly, back then when gold was $275 or $300 an ounce. Would you have anything to add to that?
Well, let me first say that, yeah, when we talk about Cerro Blanco, we talk about big systems that are typical porphyry type grades, of a gram or more. But I would remind you that we're cutting 2-ounce gold at Arco de Oro, and half-ounce right now. Just the core zone in our what we call it Arco core zone, the 2.5 meters in the middle. We proved up a kilometer of strike, and that we only have one hole that goes down to 300 meters, so it's impossible to say that it continues. But I mean, it came from somewhere. But the average is 0.5 ounce gold, right? So yeah, there's different systems here. And why was it overlooked? Well, if you knew exactly the answer to that, I guess you'd really have an advantage. But don't forget that we're kind of a 13-year overnight success. We've been acquiring more and more ground on this since 2009. So yeah, we've been at it for quite a while. We've done 6 drilling programs on it now. Nobody else has drilled this program. No majors, no anybody. There is no drilling on it other than what we've done. So yeah, perseverance, I think, is the answer to your question. How did we get it? And why is it in a junior? So we feel very blessed and fortunate that it is, and not sure what else to say.
Yeah, and also big mining companies make mistakes and have oversights all the time. So it happens. It absolutely happens. And they're not all knowing, despite the fact you think, oh, it's got a $50 billion market cap, they have to know everything. No, they don't. They don't know everything. And they regularly make mistakes. I
would like to add to that I wouldn't, sitting here saying that big mining companies made a mistake. I mean, they're looking at things all the time, and it's impossible to have, we're lucky 100% of the time of what we look at and never overlook something. So I'd remind you that nobody has ever drilled this property until we started drilling it. So it's not like there was a smoking gun of really great information available to majors, but rather we generated that information through our drilling and our sampling and our IP.
Right. Yeah. So there was some artisanal mining activity on the western side of the property, but there's been no core drilling.
That's correct. There's been artisanal mining down to maybe a few meters, 5 meters or so from surface, and that's been going on since the early 1900s. We don't have records, so we don't exactly know when, but there's substantial artisanal mining at surface on the property.
I have to ask because, the company has had a step change in terms of its investor, awareness and appreciation. Obviously, that shows up in the share price and the trading volume. From transitioning from, relative, obscurity, Al, let's say a couple years ago, where if I said San Lorenzo Gold, nobody knew what I was talking about, except for maybe one or two guys. To now, you're definitely sort of captured the the investor attention. Do you feel more pressure? Does anything change due to the increased attention and the share price?
Not to me. Keep in mind that we're drilling right now, Robert, so we feel confident. We feel happy about what's going on. We don't have assays, so let's make sure that we're clear about that. But I mentioned earlier that the property's pretty blessed with mineralization, and so it's quite a pleasure to be drilling there, and so that doesn't put a lot of stress on. I'm going to suggest to you that if a lot of disappointment comes from a drill rig, that could influence you, where you say if things changed and are you stressed? Yeah, a bit, but I'm not suggesting that we're having that situation right now. Again, can't quantify anything, but it's a blessed property.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, I'm going to have people asking me, you spoke to Al, when are the assays going to come out? When are we going to get more results? So, Al, when are we going to get more results?
During February.
Okay.
Yeah, and I imagine that starting in February and continuing on for months, there will be results as they come out.
So so you're just going to publish them as soon as you have them, or do you think you're going to wait to put 2 or 3 holes into one, news release?
I would think that probably more than one at a time as they apply to each other. What do I mean by that? Well, clusters of holes on a similar target should probably all go together. And so we have 2 or 3 of those going on right now, between drilling on that IP on the west side of Cerro Blanco's litho-cap, but then also groups of holes on line D8, for instance, at Cerro Blanco, and D5. And then we're also drilling along underneath, actually, old workings. And so those kind of things should be lumped together as well, so the bigger picture is shown rather than a single individual hole from time to time. I think a single hole has the potential for being misleading, and therefore putting a few together so that people can really see the picture might be very justified.
Okay, perfect. And then look, I'll give you the last word here. I mean, I think the story is pretty well understood, and the drill results speak for themselves, and hopefully they will keep speaking for themselves. But I'll give you the final word in terms of what investors can expect from San Lorenzo Gold in 2026.
How about I say this, which I've said a couple times very recently: we're just getting started. We're just getting going.
Very good. Al, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, very much so. And thank you, Robert. Great to be with you.